activism together. So without any further ado, I'm just going to start off with our keynote speaker. We are so lucky to be joined by a local author. Jordan K. Casamar is a Black prose writer from West Des Moines, Iowa, with an MFA in creative nonfiction from the University of Minnesota. His essays have appeared in Catapult, the Kenyon Review, Quali Journal, and elsewhere. And in the fall of 2021, he was awarded a McDowell Fellowship. His debut novel, which you all received a complimentary copy of this evening, courtesy of the Foundation and Pepco. Thank you. Thank you. His debut novel, young adult romantic dramedy, one of my favorite genres, titled How to Lose a Best Friend, is out now. He currently lives in Washington, D.C. with his wife, their son, and their 2 cats. Please check him out at jordankcasamar.com. The individual in question, I'm going to welcome up to the stage. Please join me with a round of applause.
Hey, all.
Hi. Yes.
All right, great. This is wild. So, first and foremost, I just want to give a tremendous thank you to the DC Public Library System, not just for having me here as your keynote speaker, but for doing the very hard work of providing access, knowledge, and support to our communities. The folks who work here and at every library here in DC are some of our finest public servants, and they deserve 1,000 times over our care and our applause.
Absolutely, absolutely. Woo!
So about 2.5 years ago, I started writing How to Lose a Best Friend, which hit the shelves just 2 days ago, which I'm still
Congratulations.
I'm still really struggling to wrap my head around. So in short, it's a young adult romantic dramedy about a boy named Zeke who's in love with his best friend Imogen, and everyone's always assumed that they'd end up together. And they've been real open about that assumption. But this has put Imogen under quite a bit of pressure, especially because she doesn't feel the same way, and that's something that Zeke is just not willing to accept. But before I started working on this novel, I was primarily an essayist. And in my first semester of graduate school, Michael Brown was murdered in Ferguson, Missouri, which is about 10 minutes from where my grandma lives and from where my brother and I used to play growing up. After that, what I planned on writing in grad school shifted tremendously. I started writing essays about the murders of Black folks by the police, and I was in Minneapolis for the murders of Jamar Clark, Philando Castile, and George Floyd. I wrote about each murder, and in so doing, I found myself more powerful, more empowered, more connected to other Black folks, and most importantly, more free than ever before. But I will get back to that a little later. All of which is to say, this novel was a very different project for me. And it wasn't until I was asked to be your speaker tonight that I realized the connection between the essays that I wrote and the novel I just published, which is that they're both about who gets to have power and how. Now in my essays, it's clear who has the lion's share of power: the police, the justice system, whiteness. The essays then exist as a way of reclaiming power. In my creating these essays, I wanted to serve as witness and bring to light new elements of what might otherwise go unseen. In the novel, though, it's not so clear. For one, I'm dealing with very different subject material. The tension between Zeke and Imogen is much less intense, the consequences of their conflicts far less grave. But the more time I spent with my 2 characters, the more I realized that despite the difference in stakes, what I wanted to communicate with the novel was the same as what I wanted to communicate with my essays. That is, I wanted to show how someone can use art as their voice when their voice cannot or will not be heard. So throughout the novel, Imogen struggles against these assumptions about her love life. She readily admits that people have reason to think the way that they do, but that doesn't mean that people can just disregard her feelings on the matter. And it'd be one thing if it was just coming from her friends, but the pressure's on from all sides. Her parents, folks she's never met, school janitor, and all the TV shows and rom-coms that all say the same thing, that she's supposed to get with Zeke. There's only one place where Imogen feels truly safe, and that is in her own stories, where she has control. Early in the novel, it's not spoiling anything, Imogen has a panic attack in relation to the situation with Zeke. And she can't calm herself down until she pulls out her notebook out of her bag and writes, losing herself in a story she's been working on, and slowly but surely, she finds a source of power within her, and the panic subsides. Now, about 2 weeks ago, I was in a similar state, and I couldn't tell you why I felt the way I did, why my chest felt tight, why I felt a roaring noise in my head, why I couldn't slow my heart rate down, why I felt I was being crushed by the very fact that I existed, trapped in my body and in my mind. I tried breathing exercises, I tried walking around the block, I tried washing my face, eating snacks, stretching, and nothing worked. And then I sat down for 90 minutes, wrote 20 pages of a new novel that's been kicking around inside my head for the last year, and just like that,
Awesome.
I felt fine. See, art, when created for yourself, can be healing. It's one of the best things about art, and why it's so critically important for everyone to have some kind of creative, artistic pursuit, whether that be writing or woodworking. But we aren't here to talk about how art can heal and help. We're here to talk about art, power, and how the use of the former can be used to combat the abuse of the latter. So when I think about power, I think about violence, and I don't just mean bloodshed. In fact, that's the kind of violence that I think about the least. When I think about the violence enacted upon the planet by corporations who'd rather destroy the world we live on than lose a few percents of profit. I think about the violence enacted upon the many folks with next to nothing when they're blamed for their poverty and desperation by the few with everything. I think about the violence enacted upon folks who work and work and work themselves to exhaustion and still get called lazy just to have their basic needs met. But that is not what power is, not really. Power isn't violence. It's not even control. After all, how many of you have started on a drawing, a painting, a song, a story, and discovered halfway through that your creation had developed a mind of its own? How many of you have been surprised by one of your characters? No, power is something else. When it's localized in the hands of the few, it's dangerous. But when power spreads among many, it becomes freedom. And that is where art comes in. Not just the creation of art, but the spreading of it far and wide. Now, to be clear, there's nothing wrong with creating art just for yourself. I mean, you can write stories that'll never be seen, sculptures that are for your eyes and your eyes only. This can feel good, calming, a relief. It can make someone feel more whole, more complete, more powerful. But in my novel, it wasn't until Imogen published a story that explained how trapped she felt and how painful it was to be under so much pressure that she got folks to finally listen, to finally hear her and other girls like her. Her single story was a catalyst for so much more. It took me by surprise, really, until I realized the link between my own essays and this novel. That it wasn't until I published my own art about the pain and the pressure and the struggles that I faced as a black man watching so many black men die that I realized both how alone I'd felt and how alone I really wasn't. See, Imogen and I, we found connection through putting our art in the world. And with connection comes freedom. There's nothing more powerful than freedom. So I'm going to say something that might make you groan a little. I mean, I groaned a little as I wrote it, but the truth is what it is. You are powerful, each and every one of you. You create, but more than that, you show your art to the world. And there is nothing more frightening, more powerful, more essential than putting yourself and your art out there. So as I leave you tonight, I'd also like to leave you with 2 questions that I hope you ask yourself often. How will you use your art to free yourself? And how will you use your art to free others? Thank you all so much for your brilliance and your bravery.
Woo! Thank you. amazing. He's amazing.
Amazing. Now it's time for our Q&A portion with our guest speaker this evening. And I'd like to welcome to the stage our two facilitators for this portion of the event. Please welcome Salam Weimer and London Hubbard. She just graduated from George Washington University this past spring. She's the intern with DC Public Libraries, Youth and Family Services, and the DCPL Foundation. And then London Hubbard, she goes to KIPP Preparatory Academy. And she is, you're a senior now, right, London? She is a senior, so give it up for that. Not an easy thing to be. And she's the teen council member who works at the Benning Library. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this portion of the evening over to them. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you for doing this. I think it's not often that people get a chance to actually see the person behind the words that they're reading. So, yeah, I just want to say thank you. Yeah, do you want to ask the first question?
Yes, I can. Okay, so my first question for you today is, what was this transition from Iowa to DC like, and what is your favorite thing about living in the city?
Is this
You're
on?
laughing.
Yeah. So, I hate Iowa. I think Iowa is probably the worst state, just because there's nothing. It's so middle, you know. And did you know the Red Delicious apple was created in Iowa, and that's the worst apple there is. And I think that tells you everything you need to know about the state. I don't know if there's any Iowans in here. If there are, I'm not going to take back what I said. But I moved from Iowa when I was about 24.
Wow.
Was in Austin, Texas for a while, then Minneapolis, which is where I was before here. And one of the things that was so just wonderful about being here is the fact that I'm sitting in this room and I'm seeing more than two Black people.
That's powerful for sure.
I grew up in a 98% white suburb, which had ramifications.
Of course.
And moving here, I've never felt as comfortable. Even when I see like 20 different police cars on the street, I never feel as unsafe as I felt in Minneapolis when I saw just one. Because I'm not the only target, you know.
Right.
So that was one of the
Fantastic.
big shifts, big changes. I love being in the city. I love being out of the Midwest. Eastern time's a little hard when it comes to football because games start real late, but that's the only drawback.
Cool. I grew up in the suburbs of Tennessee, so I understand. Could you tell us a bit about your writing process and maybe how that has changed? So I know you had your master's, but maybe even as a kid when you were writing versus now and through college and stuff.
Yeah, I was always a reader more than I was a writer. I started reading, I was a real weird freak child, and I started reading when I was like 18 months old, I think.
Wow.
It made my eyesight really bad. I don't recommend it. But I didn't start seriously writing until my freshman year of high school. A teacher pulled me aside and was like, "Hey, I think you're pretty all right at this." And I had grown up as generally one of like 30 or fewer Black people in my school at any given point. And there were very few teachers who had kind things to say or encouragement to give me. So I started writing after that. I wrote a lot of like science fiction and fantasy, a lot of fanfic, I think, as all writers, I think, start out writing fan fiction, I'm pretty sure. And then I actually quit writing for a while. My Dad had convinced me that it was not lucrative or worthwhile, and I stopped. It wasn't until I was really struggling in my life, in my sort of mental health and my depression, that I found my way back to writing. And even then, it wasn't fiction that I wandered into, but nonfiction. There was a guy I knew who full disclosure, I've been sober for about 13 years, and I used to drink a lot with him. Thank you.
Congratulations.
I drink a lot with him, and he and the other guy who ran the fiction track got into an argument about who would have me in their class, and he's like, I've seen him wasted, so I get dibs. So he took me and I started writing essays, and that was kind of a gateway to an entirely new style of writing for me. I recently returned to writing fiction because, for one thing, reality is tough. But as I mentioned before, I've written so many pieces about Black pain and violence and death, and by the time we left Minneapolis after George Floyd was murdered, the idea of writing nonfiction and of wading back into that conversation made me want to scream. There is still an essay or a piece of nonfiction that's out there. It's kind of bubbling up in my head now. But I'm really loving being back in fiction and writing about just Black folks with weird abilities. And I'm working on a novel currently that's loosely based off of my great-grandfather's murder back in St. Louis, but it's mostly a ghost story.
It's interesting the part where you said that you stopped writing for a while, and just how other people's input influences, how you see your own gifts or passions. So, and you said it a bit in your opening speech, but do you have any, I guess, messages for, anyone here who's probably done their art and feels it's essential to them, but because it's not, gonna make them millions tomorrow, they don't see it as important?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, one of the hardest things about being an artist, about creating art, is that we live in a capitalist nightmare. And trying to be an artist within that framework is really difficult. You're going to get told by a lot of people not to do it, to do literally anything else. And that's not to say, like, I can only speak from my perspective as a writer. Writing 80% of the time, awful. Just, you're right, these words, sometimes you're trying to put words together and you're like, well, this sounds dumb. This also sounds dumb. These characters sound silly. But the other 20% of the time, you tap into something that feels truer than true, that feels so powerful and so fundamental to existence that you have no choice but to carry on. Like when people ask me why I write, I say because I literally cannot not write. Those years that I wasn't were some of the worst years of my life. Made a lot of mistakes, did a lot of things I'm not proud of, and I think a lot of that happened because I was running from who I am and how I speak to myself. At the end of the day, it's hard to make money doing art. Sometimes you're gonna have a side job, sometimes you're gonna have to rely on, as I do, having a partner who has a pretty high-paying job, who's more than okay with me taking care of our son full-time, and then writing when I can.
I love it.
But what is your other, the other option is to not do art. And going down that road is going to rot you from the inside. I think that most people, even people who don't consider themselves artists, need creativity to survive. I think creativity is as integral to human existence as food and water. I think it is the thing that, not that we're not animals, but it is the thing that really separates us from the animal kingdom is the imagination, is creativity, although crows are getting close every day. We need it, people need it, and I think when folks start moving away from that, they start to really lose their way internally. So yeah, you're gonna be broke, but at least you won't be broke and sad.